Welcome, people of God. Welcome, Central Pacific Conference. Will you pray with me? God of the morning light, gather us this day. Help us to arrive here in this place with these people. Keep us present. Keep us curious. Keep us in walking in love so that we might be renewed, so that we might be inspired, so that we might be opened further to your work of love and justice in this beautiful world, this beautiful broken world that needs each of us so desperately to be alive, connected, and engaged. We pray these things.
So I was asked to give a homily this morning, and I thought I would tell you a story instead. And this story, I will tell you, is a very old story. It is also a Bible story. So I don't know if it's factual, but I do know that it's true. The first time that Jonathan met David, it was one of those like powerful thunderbolt, like skies open kind of moment. I don't know what Jonathan saw that day in David. I know that the Bible tellers tell us that David was red and had beautiful eyes. I like to think of him as like the color of an anthill, or like, you know, those old red brick buildings that are dark and weathered. And maybe he had dark woolly hair or locks, like later his most beautiful son, who was caught in a tree by his strong hair. But whatever Jonathan saw that morning, maybe it was the presence of God, because God was already choosing David over Jonathan's father Saul. Whatever he saw in David that morning, we're told that his soul was bound to the soul of David. And he immediately stripped himself of his armor and gave it to David, because sometimes you meet someone and you realize, like, it would be more worse for me that I die than that they die. That was the kind of love that Jonathan had for David in an instant, in a moment, for this red man with beautiful eyes and the presence of God on him. Now, you would think that that kind of love, that kind of like super amazing, like made for television, made for the widescreen movies kind of love, would never need to be spoken. It would just be perfect. Everything would be great for that kind of love. But the fact was that things were very hard for them. And there came a moment in their lives, a day when Jonathan realized that they had some things that needed to be spoken, that they needed to tell one another, here's what I can trust you with. Here's what you can trust me with. We're taught that love often doesn't need words, but they needed words. Because see, Jonathan's father might have had it out for David. And Jonathan needed David to know, I've got your back even against my father. And so they went out into a field, they hid behind some rocks, and Jonathan said, I promise you, I'm going to go and find out what's going on with my father. And either tomorrow or the day after, I will know what's in his heart, and I will come and tell you, I promise. And he said, I have some things that I need you to promise to me, because I don't know if I'm going to get out of this. And so I need you to take care of my family. Will you promise that to me? And we call this the covenant that Jonathan made with David. And he invited God into that relationship. And he said to David, God will also be part of this. And God will keep you accountable if you make this promise to me and don't keep it. And same thing for me. And then we're told that they held each other and wept. Because sometimes even love that is as big as that needs promises, needs to be spoken, needs words. Now, we talk about covenant in the United Church of Christ. And we also talk about how church is like family. And I would like to think that church can be better than family. Because sometimes you don't know if your father wants to kill the man that you love most in the world. That's family. Right? And sometimes we don't know. We have unspoken rules in our houses about what kind of love is okay. And I think that church can be better than family. That we can create covenants with each other. And maybe the kinds of covenants that we create with each other, when we realize that love that is big and powerful, where our soul is even bound to another person, that if we can bring our words into those relationships, if we can bring God into those relationships and bring covenant into those relationships, they can be more powerful. And maybe that can spill over into our families. Now, I'm sorry to say that the end of David and Jonathan's story is tragic. Because when he spoke to his father in fact did want to kill David. And they never saw each other again. And David kept his covenant with Jonathan through all the years and took care of Jonathan's family, because he had said that day, I will be responsible to you, and do you be responsible to me? This is the kind of thing we're going to be talking about today. We decided that we didn't want to just end this service with just me talking. And so Lee graciously went through the hymnal and found a hymn and said, I can play this. And so I think I can play it. Participation, not perfection. And so I'm going to invite you all to stand as you are able in body or in spirit. And we're going to sing together number 741. What? 471. got the numbers mixed around. 471, what a covenant.
CPC, you really know how to sing. Well, that felt good. I sure still feel so filled up, even just singing one song. Do you guys feel like that? Like, oh, we can still sing. We are still singing. Praise God. This morning, I know it's kind of mysterious. It just says Sarah Rosenaw, Art of Hosting. So you don't even know what's going to happen. I guess we could have put more descriptors, but also I really congratulate you for showing up for the mystery. This is also an important Christian practice. So thank you for showing up for the mystery. Art of Hosting, just so you know, Art of Hosting is really a loose set of tools put together by some practitioners, some facilitators, some people who are leading people. Some people who are leading people who got together and said, you know, there's got to be a better way to do this. What have you been experimenting with? Well, I've been experimenting with really getting people to sit in a circle and talk together again. You know, throw out the PowerPoint, throw out the strategic plans, just talk. Well, I've been experimenting with letting people set the agenda right then and there, what they want to talk about. And then we break off and talk about the things we want to talk about, rather than wondering what we want to talk about, planning what we want to talk about before and setting it all up. And then the people come and maybe they don't really want to talk about that. So it was a group of people that brought tools that they were working on together. And then they said, well, this is a living thing. Let's teach each other's tools. And then we'll just keep learning and keep teaching each other our tools. And so Art of Hosting is a training you can take by practitioners who are leading people, who are always evolving and experimenting with tools for connecting people and getting work done and together. And it really comes out of a deeper belief that we as people are not machines. We are actually living beings, and we're organized together just like the natural world in self-organized systems that are always evolving and emerging. And so paying attention to human systems like that allows us to work with them in a little bit of a different way. So you can talk to me more about that. I'm a super nerd about all the things I like to be nerdy about, and this is one of them. But I just wanted to tell you that because I think, you know, it says Art of Hosting, and what is that? That's what it is. It's tools for connecting people to unleash the energy that we actually have together. It tries not to put so many boxes around our time. It tries to kind of open up space so that the energy that we have through connecting can be utilized and harnessed for the greatest good and for our mutually desired futures. So we'll be in some of that today. This morning, well, I'll say first, later today, we're going to be in conversation called open space. And that's where we'll set an agenda with the conversations we all want to have. So I'll explain that in the afternoon. But this morning, our theme for the conference is covenant. So we've been in worship around covenant. Tyler has been preaching about covenant at our churches all year. And we wanted to take the opportunity this morning to explore that a little bit more. And we're going to do that with a tool called Fishbowl, which is one of the tools that's utilized in some art of hosting and other facilitation practices. So how that's going to look, I'm just going to tell you how it's going to look, and then I'm going to lead you through it. Okay, so how it's going to look is we're going to have 6 folks who volunteered to be in the fishbowl. And I'm going to invite you up, fishbowl friends, just a moment. Fishes. Corliss, you're not in the fishbowl, but you were a fish. So this is exciting because we're going to invite these friends of ours to become fish and be in the fishbowl. You see my fishbowl? It's very cute. And we're going to have a real dynamic conversation about covenant in the different areas of our being church together as United Church of Christ. And I've got some questions. I'll be asking questions of the fishbowl folks, and they'll be having the conversation. And you'll get to just listen to the conversation first round. And then we'll have an opportunity to take questions from you that I'll invite you to write down at a particular time. And then we'll be hearing a little bit more from the fishbowl, answering questions. And then we'll have an opportunity to talk with each other about what we're hearing, what's coming up for us, how's this impact our understanding of covenant and the people we're in relationship with in our local church. And then we'll talk all together. So we'll sort of have a morning of covenant conversation in a couple of different modalities. So I know you don't have a bulletin, but I wanted to tell you the arc of this so that you can relax and know that I'm going to lead you through it. Also, there's going to be slides up here that will lead you through it. So all the questions I'm asking and the different moments that we'll be in will be on the slides. So that is, you do actually have a bulletin. It's right here. Okay. So fishbowl folks, can you come up? So the reason I have my back turned is because one of the modalities, the points of fishbowl is that we are actually talking to each other, and we are swimming in the fishbowl, and they're looking into the fishbowl and listening in. So you're getting to kind of connect to our intimate conversation. So it's not meant to be exclusive. You can still hear, but we're not a panel. Exactly. So thank you, Tyler, for reminding me of that. Why don't we start by just introducing ourselves to each other and say what setting you're in related to the United Church of Christ, because we've invited 2 folks from the national setting, 2 folks who lead local churches, and then 2 conference people and lay folks, right? 2 local church leaders, 2 national setting, 2 conference, 3 areas of the UCC that are in covenant together. So yeah, just say your name, where your setting is, and which part you represent.
I'm Corliss Marsh, live in the Dalles, Oregon, and go to the Dalles UCC. And I am a lay person. and leadership in the church.
Yeah, I wonder if it could be bumped up a bit, because it's not as loud as mine.
Do I need to repeat? Oh, all right, but I'm talking to them.
Yes. That's right.
Okay. Corliss Marsh, belonged to the Dalles UCC Church, lived in the Dalles 27 years, and a member of the church and leadership in the local church.
I'm Vicky Stifter. I serve as pastor at Riverside Community Church in Hood River, and I'm also the moderator on the CPC board this year.
So we might as well say our local church, because everybody who is in the UCC is a local church member.
That's right.
Whatever setting we serve in.
That's right.
So I'm Tyler Connolly. I'm a member of Waverly UCC in Southeast Portland. Is it Southeast?
Mhm.
Okay. I always wonder if it's Southeast or South or Northeast. And I'm the conference minister, and my pronouns are he and they.
Oh, thank you for pronouns too.
So my name is Melanie Uman. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a member of Salem First Congregational United Church of Christ, and I live here in Eugene. And place is so interesting, isn't it? I work for the national staff living here in Eugene. Just as since June, I have been in a position with the Ministerial Excellence Support and Authorization Team, the United Church of Christ. And my title, they're all so wordy, is Minister for Committee and Ministry Leadership and Development. So I'm sure I'll have time to illuminate that a little bit, but that's me.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Ken Salati. He, him are my pronouns. I'm a member of First Congregational Church in Norwalk, Connecticut. I'm the director of philanthropy for the national setting, regionally deployed, as many of us are in Connecticut.
Welcome.
I'm David Randall-Bodman, and I am serving, my pronouns are he, him, and I am serving as local pastor for Bethel Congregational United Church of Christ in Beaverton, beautiful downtown Beaverton, Oregon, which really doesn't have a downtown, but that's another story. There's a where's the there. Yeah, and I've been at Bethel for 19 years, believe it or not. And so, yeah, that's me.
And I'm Sarah Rosenat. I'm the facilitator today, but I pastor Waverly United Church of Christ for one more week. Yeah, and I'm leaving that call to move on to some other things. So, but I have been there for 6.5 years and been in the conference as a minister for almost 10. So happy to be with you guys today. Thank you for coming. We wanted to just have a conversation about covenant, particularly related to these different, 3 different areas of our church. Tyler started us off with some thoughts about covenant, some story really about how we are in loving relationship with each other. One of the things Tyler and I talked about when we were talking about this conversation is, what are we trusting one another for? You know, what am I responsible for, and what can I trust others for? That there's trust in covenants. So, and we also talked about the uniqueness of each of these settings, local, conference, and national. So I want to just start with that so we could sort of pull out a little bit like those different settings and how they're unique. So the first question I have for us, and I think we can do this like kind of popcorn, like each person doesn't have to talk about each question, because I have 1, 2, 3 for us, and we'll be talking for probably 15 or 20 minutes. Does that sound like a good way to do it. So the first question I have is, what can your setting do, or what does your setting do or accomplish that can't be done by other settings? So how is your setting unique in a particular way?
The setting of the local church is really unique because we get to serve people in our area, our people. So it's really localized. I mean, that's what local church is.
Stating the obvious, the national setting is across the United States. And our ability to learn from all of the settings of the church and find out what the needs are and try to respond to those needs as best as we're able, and to set direction and a course for the national setting of the United Church of Christ is part of what we do.
Yeah, and I love Corliss, so I'm glad Corliss is up here as another local church representative. And when I think about covenant for the local church, there are so many levels. This came from the boundary training yesterday, so many different triangles and relationships. But the two that kind of perk up for me are the covenant that we have with people who are already connected to the church, our members, or we've got regular people who don't necessarily want to join the church, but it's really their place. So we call them members and friends of Bethel Church. So there's a way in which we have a covenant together to support and to challenge each other on this way of trying to follow Jesus. But we also have a covenant with the local community, and I think that's what Corliss was getting at, is that we have people coming to us that have never been in a UCC church or have never been in church. And so it's trying to be hospitable and meeting them where they are and trying to have ears and heart open to what the local community needs and wants. And so that's very practical, like food. We literally feed people when they come to the church. But we also provide them friendship. And one of the things about these conversations is I keep thinking about pre-pandemic, pandemic, lingering pandemic, and what we're going to continue to do with covenant is a little fuzzy right now, other than creating safe space for people to be who they are, and knowing that there's so much anxiety in the world, we can create this place where they feel safe and affirmed, and they're hearing some positive things in a sea of really negative, crappy stuff.
Oh, okay. So I putting on the CPC board. I kind of think of us as the board's unique role as I don't know that we're the weavers of the web at all, but somehow we're illuminators. That's what it is. We're like illuminators of the web. So we're all these independent, far-flung local churches. And sometimes it's difficult to be in relationship with one another across distance, especially in times of pandemic. So I think one of the tasks of one of the things that the board can do, the Central Pacific Conference can do in that setting, is to help shine a light on the web, remind us of our connections, and try to strengthen the ties between the various parts of the web.
When I go to a local church, one of the things that when I'm working with a local church, like a search committee or something like that, one of the things that I often say is, I can offer the wisdom of the wider community. I have seen what's happened in other churches, and I can say, this path that you're headed down didn't work very well in several other places. Or I can say, this path that you're choosing has worked. I've seen it work really well. I think this is a good idea. And so for the local church, I think that's part of what the conference offers, is this like like a perspective that is a little broader than just my local, the folks that I'm feeding, in my neighborhood, but a sense of like, I have a little larger lens, right? I think for the national setting, what I have is I'm closer to the local churches and I'm closer to the ministers. And so I have that perspective of like, it's like this weird sort of place of being able, I don't have this like broad perspective, but I don't have the local church perspective. For the local church, I can provide a little larger lens. And for the national setting, I can provide a little narrower lens and say to Mesa, this thing that you're doing, it doesn't actually work for ministers, right? And so that ability, like that's the place I think of the conference, is that like for the local church, I can say, well, here's this sort of larger perspective that you might not be thinking about. And for the national setting, I can say, here's this kind of smaller perspective that you might not be thinking about.
And to build on that, I think, if we're doing our job well in the national church, we listen well to the judicatory, the conference ministers, the association ministers, who speak often on behalf of the local churches, although we do have direct relationship with local churches as well, but we have this unique privilege of being able to listen well and to be able to reflect in like guiding documents, like our manual on ministry was the work of the national church. And that was a lot of careful listening, but it was also not just the work for the church in the moment, but imagining where the church might be going, and if we do that listening well and the discernment well, then it can actually even be prophetic. Like we can even be making ways and imagining possibilities and infrastructure that can help all of us in our own unique ways be the church that we're being called to be in a larger sense, and creating that. And in the national setting, I don't know, Ken's done this a lot longer. I have the sense that we're not on the front lines. We're really in this beautiful, and in some ways we are, and I'm speaking particularly to the team that I'm on, that we're in this beautiful supporting role. So we can really like process and seek to understand and then imagine some new possibilities that could really make a difference in local churches, for local church clergy and leadership. So
Can I say something? Oh, I have a mic.
oh, you have a mic.
When I was the moderator of the conference, we did a conference-wide listening session. And one of the things that happened during that, did some conversations with folks at national around like hiring our designated conference minister, and then around hiring Tyler. But one of the things I remember was a metaphor that they talked about, some folks talked about, shared with me, that we used to think of these relationships as like a wheel, where there was like national, like was kind of in the center, or even the conference for the local church was like in the center with all these like resources, and you would just go in and get them and come out, right? It was like kind of a little bit more like of a hub, and also maybe had a little bit more like transactional kind of understanding. And the folks that were talking to me shared like, I loved that you said the web, because they said there's different metaphors actually that articulate like not just actually how we are working in a different way, but would invite us to remember that the local church is part of the conference. The local church and the conference are the national setting. So we're not actually separate, but we're kind of interwoven and as a whole web, we have different perspectives, like national maybe is kind of looking at and kind of in more of a vision of the whole web, and then can see like what is emerging, you know? And it's cool because like part of our polity is that we're not really top down. Like, you know, I've been part of other denominational conversations where it's like, yeah, well, you know, the national setting just like rolls that out and then everyone does it. And sometimes it is frustrating in the UCC to be like, okay, I'm inventing these things at the local church. Like, has anyone else done this? Like, do I have to make a personnel policy, or like, is there a template somewhere? Please help me, right? But at the same time, it also that web, instead of that top down kind of mentality, allows for like experimenting to happen. So, you know, I remember being a part, I'm going to stop talking after this, but I remember being a part of a different association in Denver. And that association was really committed to ordaining people who were not serving local churches. And they were, you know, and that was kind of a way that they were experimenting with, like, what is church? What does it mean to minister to the community? And that, you know, started to catch on, and they started to share, and different associations have different practices and in that, but it's like those experiments can take place and y'all can listen to that and lift it up in something like the manual on ministry. All right. Let's shift to another question, which is, we talked a little bit about how we sort of each have a unique part to play in this web. And maybe we serve each other in particular ways, but also I think part of being in relationship is that we can sometimes illuminate for the other what the other can't really see for themselves. So this question is, what do our different settings, like in our setting, how can we illuminate for another setting what they are? How might we name the gifts of other settings that they might not see themselves? So before we were talking from like our setting, but now I'm inviting, like, talk to another setting about the gifts you think they bring from the perspective of your setting. That makes sense?
Well, I'm holding the microphone, so.
Go for it.
I'll just plunge in. So something I have heard in my 25 years of ordained ministry in the United Church of Christ, but didn't really make sense to me until I started working in the national setting, is that the different settings of the church cannot, would never want to speak for each other, but that we can speak to each other. And that's actually making sense to me now. It takes a while sometimes for things to sink in, right? So I feel like in the national setting, and hopefully this is responding to your question the way, you know, yeah. I feel like there's a lot of anxiety in the church. And I feel like a big part of our role with MESA, and for me personally, as the minister for a committee on ministry, development, and leadership, is to be a non-anxious presence and to slow things down when it feels like everything's falling apart or imploding, or whatever you want to say is going on right now in the church, because there's a lot of moving parts, is, you know, to have that wide view and to say, you know, to maybe illuminate like where there's opportunities for transformation, and to bring some of that non-anxious presence, which is a calling for all of us as ministers, right? That's whatever it is we bring into the room, hopefully we bring that. And to be able to speak to the local church and say, you know, there is this broader perspective. And a project that I'm working on, which is really exciting and could have a lot of positive impact on the church, we have a manual on ministry. Well, there's a manual on church that the 2017 General Synod, there was a resolution. So a guiding document for the church, for local churches. It's a huge project. There's a lot of amazing people working on it. But it has opportunity to transform the ways that we're in covenant, the way we do local church, the ways we imagine our possibilities. So I'll stop there.
So I'll say to our local churches that one of the gifts that you bring for me is that you love my neighbors where you are. And, I'm not in downtown Beaverton, and there's not a downtown Beaverton, but, right. And I don't live in the Dells. And so I need you to love my neighbors there because I'm not there, right? And I need you to know what they need in a way that I could never know, because I'm not there. And that for me is one of the gifts that you bring to me in the conference setting, is that I know that you are in the Dells, loving the people in the Dells, doing ministry in the Dells, and that I can trust you with those people who I love, even if I don't know all of them. And the national setting, I think one of the gifts that you bring to me is that ability to one, see some patterns that I don't see, right? Because you know what's going on in Denver, and you know what's going on in Massachusetts, and like you have these sort of perspectives of these places that I don't. And you can see patterns in the wider church that I can't see going on. And so you're able to often help me see, and you said this, the future in a way that I can't see it from where I'm sitting, right? And that's a gift that you bring to me in the conference setting.
As a local church, I think that when I look at the conference and the national church, the gifts that they bring to the local church would be the sense of belonging. We belong to something larger than us. I mean, true, there's the nitty-gritty stuff and the policies and all that stuff, but just being able to say, we belong to you. And that's the gift you give us.
So the founders of the United Church of Christ, I think, believed that unity was more important than the things that divide us. And this experiment in polity, which is crazy. I mean, our polity is literally crazy because we value the word autonomy almost as strongly or perhaps stronger than the word covenant and how we're connected. And David Rui, a pastor in Iowa, once said something that stuck with me, that if there is going to be a tombstone in the United Church of Christ, they will have one word on it, and that word will be autonomy. Because of the interpretation of autonomy being, call us, we'll call you when we need you. And there is a disconnect in the United Church of Christ between settings of the church. And we tend to other each other within the United Church of Christ. And that, it seems to me, is one of the gifts that we can bring to each other is, how are we connected? What is the covenant that we hold together? A contract in sort of contrasting vision is a contract is set up to protect interests. But what Tyler said this morning about the story, covenants protect relationships or build relationships. And the idea of othering doesn't do us any good. And it is a sport that we take some pleasure in the United Church of Christ. And so I've been part of all the settings. I've been a local church pastor, I've been in a conference staff, and now serve in the national setting. And all of us are trying to make our way, right? All of us are trying to live out the vision of the United Church of Christ. And the thing that we don't spend a lot of time talking about is, what does unity mean in 2022? What does it mean to be united? And not in some, we must follow this particular way, but what is it? What is the glue of covenant that holds us together?
So as I've been preaching about covenant this year, and preaching from the same texts for in different settings this year, one of the things that I've come to realize is that there is no covenant without autonomy. That that covenant relationships have to be relationships between people who have agency, right? And that it's actually our ability to be autonomous that allows us to be in covenant with each other. Because a relationship that is coercive can't be a covenant. And so when I enter into a covenant with someone, I am like reminding myself that they are a full individual with the ability to covenant with me. And that's the relationship that God has with us, which is mind-blowing. That God would have that kind of relationship with us, say, you are fully autonomous from me and you can choose. Jesus says to the disciples, I chose you, you didn't choose me. And then asks them to choose him, which is mind-blowing. And so I think, like, we think of autonomy and covenant as sort of opposites of each other, and they're actually completely intertwined. Like, you can't have covenant without autonomy, and like, you can't have a relationship if you're autonomous without the covenant.
It's a great, I'm glad you brought that up because it's true. The tension is there, but it's also like a requirement, is what you're saying. More and more, I think this part has to do with like what I'm going to go do next in my ministry, but how we are together, you know, as community is very similar patterns to how we are in like individual relationships. So if you think about, you know, a marriage or a partnership between two people, you can't really have that if you have total fusion, right? You have to have some individuation, which is some autonomy. But if you have total autonomy, like what kind of relationship do you really have? Like you're not actually talking or sharing. So that's sort of my last question for us before we hear from our audience is related to receiving, not in a transactional way, but in a relational way. Like when you tell a friend or a partner, like, I really need this kind of help, or I would just really love a back rub. You know, it's actually hard to ask in vulnerability for what you need. It's a little bit different than you're supposed to give me this thing, right? It's more like, I really need some help here. So I wonder, like, what are the things that we would like to receive from the other settings? like what would we like to ask for in kind of in a more vulnerable way from our setting to another.
So we're part of what I'm thinking about and how to answer this is that there are gifts that are coming and going. And so the gift that I see coming, for example, from the conference is when we're looking at annual budget and my salary, I can say, hey, guess what? The conference has this thing called clergy guidelines, which is like, oh, well, I guess if the conference is doing this, we need to kind of pay attention. So there's a way in which, and this is very practical, nitty gritty. Well, how does a local pastor get help from the conference? So that's one example. And from the national church, oftentimes I do see the national church on sort of the cutting edge around resolutions that sometimes then percolate down to the conference and then percolate down to the local church. So it's a gift for local churches. For example, we've started this anti-racist committee in our church and are trying to educate both our local community and invite people from the community in. But that partly was because the conference passed a resolution to be an anti-racist conference. So again, it just gives me a little cred, you know, to say there are other folks who, you know, are connected and seeing things in bigger pictures. And we kind of have to, you know, pull our heads out of, you could think of whatever metaphor you want, so that we can have so we don't get stuck in our own navels. So the other thing I would say in terms of the gifts that I think the local church gives to the larger setting is we try stuff. Like how many of you have trouble getting people to volunteer to make coffee on Sunday morning or volunteer for I'm talking to everybody in the Fishbowl now. I guess it's not a problem. You can all come to Bethel and make coffee for us. Anyway, that's been kind of a challenge to get people to step up and volunteer. So we actually have a program in the community called Home Plate, which serves homeless teens. And we partnered with them. And now we have what's the program's called Home Perk, which we piloted. And we have these homeless teens working with kind of like a mentor from Home Plate, and they serve, make coffee, they can build a resume and get job skills and that kind of thing. And I've shared this with other churches, but it hasn't gotten a lot of traction. So I hope that by sharing that, there might be a gift to Tyler that you might just say, hey, here's something. If you have a nonprofit in your community that's serving teens, homeless teens or disadvantaged teens, this is one way to build their job skill set.
I have to say, this whole thing makes me a little bit crazy. I mean, this is not, you aren't making me, but I'm feeling a little two-sided because I spend my day job is as a pastor, local church pastor, and then my night job is the moderator of the conference. And so I'm like answering the questions both ways all the time. So I'm going to try to do this from the conference perspective, but as someone who has been not inside the leadership of the conference for very long. Okay. So I've been part of the conference for a long time, but this is the first time I've been on board these last 2 years. So now with that hat on, I'm going to speak to the local churches. And to myself, I think there's a level of, we need credibility as well within the local churches. We being the conference and the board and the CPC need credibility in the local churches. We need promotion of the work, the important role, illumination of the important role that the conference plays. Because as a church pastor, I know I've probably failed to do that on occasion numerous times. And people are like scratching their head, like, why it's budget, right? Why are we giving this money to the conference, right? What are they doing for us? So I think some education on the conference, relationship building, having Tyler, a member of the boards, come and talk about these kinds of things is really important. Because of course we need the financial contributions of the church, as you need them from members to survive and thrive. But underneath that, there's a deeper relationship and trust that I would like to see. It's built on trust. And I loved your thing about othering of because whoa, I've done that. So being on the kind of the inside, looking out, that's my response to your question.
I think to build on that, I think I would like for our pronoun to be we instead of us and them. I think I know I have been guilty as a local church pastor of having a transactional perspective. And I think to see that we are the church, all of the settings of the church, to me is a really exciting possibility, right? To see how the church and the world can be alive and bringing light and love and goodness and justice in so many different ways, that we can all be a part of that. And I think for me personally, in this national setting, like I need to be trustworthy. I know this isn't asking what I need from all of you. I can't control what all of you are doing, but I know on my part, I really want to be trustworthy. I want to be responsive. I want to be a good listener. I want to own my mistakes when I make them and be able to switch directions if need be, because we're listening and in relationship and we're living as a we. And I think the relationship piece, which is really interesting, because over the last couple of years, we've seen how we can be in relationships so differently through technology. And just the fact that in my 25 years of ministry, I've had 3 different ministries and I've lived in the same house in the same city is kind of amazing. That's like, I don't know, I'm still trying to wrap my mind and heart around that. But the fact that we can be in relationship, to really lean into that and be that we, I guess that's what I would hope for us. And what, yeah.
Well, I'm gonna stop all of us in this moment. That's a great place to stop, Melanie. Thank you for this round. We're gonna have more time to talk when we respond to folks. But you guys can take a little breather. You can just talk amongst yourselves. And then I'm gonna turn around and chat with everyone else. Okay, so y'all still here? Yeah, and I'm sure you have some thoughts. So what I would like you to do is turn to a neighbor and talk for just 5 minutes. What did you notice? What further questions arise? Is there a story that comes to mind? Is there something missing that you want to hear from these folks about? So chat amongst yourselves, and then I'm going to go grab my index cards so you can write a question. Thank you to our singers. I feel like both of those selections for me really connected in with the need to trust. And like, it's really hard. And it really leads me to the first question, which I thought, how can we practice self-care for the church community? And how might our different settings, like, contribute to that question? It's a good one. Those songs, just led me right to it. Melanie kind of already spoke to this a little bit about being a non-anxious presence, but there's probably more to unfold there. In this time of anxiety for the church, how can we practice self-care for the church community?
Well, one of the things I've been trying to practice with our church is changing expectations and emphasizing grace, because we're all trying to figure this out together, and there's no formula. We can't say we're not going to be wearing masks on January 1. Everything will be fine. The choir will be back. Instead, we have to be kind and gracious with each other and trust that we're not just doing this by ourselves, that God is at work with us to create this community that we can't see yet. So it's simply taking one step at a time and make the way by walking.
I think as a conference minister, one of the things that I've tried to do in these anxious times is to remind us that we're not alone, right? And because I think it's so easy to get in this situation where we're just like, my church is so small, my boat is so tiny, and the sea is so large, and I think I'm the only one. It's a queer kid. This was me. Like I'm the only one. There aren't any others. And then for someone to say, actually, there are a whole bunch of other people like you who are in the same boats that you're in. And that's one of the things that I've tried to do during these anxious times as a conference minister, is to say, this isn't just you. Like, this is bigger than just you. And so if you're feeling, in this particular way in your local church, there are lots of other churches that are feeling that way too. And it can sometimes help to ease some of the pressure that there's something wrong with me because I'm feeling anxious.
I think in these times, I think we just have to remember and affirm the positive, affirm all the good things that everybody's doing. Just, keep on doing.
Cinta does this really well. In addition to sing, one of the things that Cinta's doing is there's a question that goes up on base camp. I'm not sure who gets it, but I always just have deleted it. I'm going to confess. It says, how can we be praying for each other? How can we be praying for each other? And I'm like, got to move on. I know it's shocking. I don't respond. Yeah, but Cinta responds, and she's in the group that gets this, and Cinta responds. And so when I was off traveling to help my mom move into a assisted living, Cinta said, let's pray for Vicky. And I was like, ooh, I think I'm going to take this a little more seriously. And I like that. And I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, as many of us in the UCC did. And we used to pray. We had this rote prayer that we said, and we pray for our Pope, our Bishop, the so-and-so, and our Pope, the so-and-so. We'd say the names and they'd all roll off. But I'm not saying we need to have a Pope, but I think that our conference minister and our leaders on the national side, like including those in our prayers on the local church level, and then also be praying for churches. I love what Jen said last night, that she had taken the names of all the people who were participating, and that she's praying for us, kind of going through the list of folks who are here. Woo! There's some power in that.
So it's a great question because when we hear about anxiety, we may focus on our individual selves, but what does it mean to reduce congregational anxiety? This past week, there was a forum that some of us attended on sort of the theological understandings in this time of pandemic. It was titled The Space Between, and there were about 200 people from across the church in conversation. And one of the takeaways that I was in a small group where they were discussing the need for lamentations. That anxiety often is related to unresolved grief. And that in this time where we're ready to move on beyond whatever this is, we have not attended to the grief that is resident both in our individual bodies, but in our collective bodies. So how might lamentations and the ability for us to lament, rather than joys and concerns, what about joys and lamentations? And what is it that we can collectively do together to grieve the losses and the realization that whatever normal was, with its attendant trappings of nostalgia, we must move into the future, and whatever that looks like, God's got a good idea about it. We're just trying to figure it all out together.
Here's another one. Some curiosity about new emerging understandings of remote membership related to covenant. This comes from one of our local churches who's grown a pretty big online community across the country during this moment.
So this is one of the things that, like, I think our local churches do really well. And it's also one of the things actually that I think it's one of the great things about small local churches too, and also small conferences like ours, is the opportunity to just try stuff and like see if it works, because we're small, we can do it with each other. And so I think in this moment of so I learned a while ago about this thing called, is it Kinfin? Kinefin, which is this sort of a whole theory around how you respond to change. And that when you're in a moment of chaotic change, that you just try things, just keep trying things and see what happens.
This is in the Art of Hosting Toolkit. Connefin is one of our things that we teach.
Okay.
Yeah. Ask me about it later.
Okay. And so I think one of the things in this moment that the local church can do really well is to just try things. And so, at this summit that we had, and one of the things that then the local church can do is teach what they learned from the things that they tried to other people in settings like the national setting. And so at the summit that we just had, Adam Erickson from Clackamas UCC was a presenter and talked about how they've just changed their bylaws, and they don't know how it's going to work yet, but they've changed their bylaws. And they now are going to have two categories of members: online members and resident members. And online members have certain responsibilities, and the church has a certain relationship with online members, and resident members have certain responsibilities, and the church has a certain relationship to resident members. And so that's a place where, in this moment of change, in this liminal space, local churches can start to try things, and then I think eventually they might end up in the manual on church or the manual on ministry or in the practices of the conference. But in the moment, it's the local church that's just saying, here's the thing that's happening, let's try this.
So the idea of membership, do you remember the American Express commercial? Membership has its privileges. And perhaps the shift that is taking place is a move away from the privilege of membership. And, you know, the lawyers, I love lawyers, by the way, but focus in on the bylaws, right? And that's, you know, whenever things turn bad, people turn to the bylaws. When things are going good, nobody's pulling out the bylaws to find out what's going on. But the shift I think that is taking place is this move around, you know, the ability to be connected to a congregation thousands of miles away is I think, a wonderful opportunity for us to consider what discipleship means. And that the question isn't about sort of what my privilege is, but rather what's my mission, what's our common witness to mend the world. And that shift away from just thinking about, do I go to class to become a member? And don't get me started on what we ask for our young people compared to adults who find their entree and way into a community of faith. But this question of being a member, I think, really does invite us to think that through a little more carefully with the Spirit's movement.
Wonderful, thank you. This comes from one of our online participants. A person, this person says, as a person with a disability covenant to me means being able to enter into any UCC church and have my needs met as defined by the UCC Disability Board. But that's not true. And I'm sure that there's other individuals or groups who feel that covenant can sometimes be tokenized. How many people with disabilities, for example, are on your church leadership structure? How can we fix this when covenant is broken in different ways? Great question. Thank you.
Thank you to the person who gifted us with that question. And so my response is just that. Thank you. And I think that's where change begins, is by listening. You can't change what you're doing if you don't know what you're doing or not doing. And so awareness and a desire to listen. I really appreciate the question.
So sometimes we assume that in the church, and I think that's really curious to me, that we're not going to have brokenness and not going to have conflict and not going to have competing even desires or expectations. And we all know that's not true. And we all know we fall short. I mean, you know, isn't that like what Jesus came to remind us of, that we're broken and we're beautiful, and we can put the pieces together, and it's not going to look the same maybe as it did in the garden, right? But it's and I think, you know, what is a spiritual technology we need to really embrace that? And I think one of the big pieces is that I've learned personally is humility, like to be able, not just individually, but collectively say, this is something we really need to work on. This is broken. We fall short. We have sinned. And to confess that, to name it, to claim it, and then to work towards the repair, right? And none of the places where we're broken are brand new. All of this has history, which means there's historical injury and trauma. And I think the first place to start is to tell our truths, to hear the truth from others, and to speak our truths. And and to move forward by God's grace, because we have all we need, right, to make these things right. We really do. It's just ourselves that get in the way.
I do. I know I'm talking a lot. So I think one of the things that happens in relationships is that, I talked about this a little bit this morning with David and Jonathan. We think that things don't need to be spoken. And I think sometimes we imagine that, and we do this with our ministers, right? So the conference is in covenant with all of the ministers who are authorized in the conference. And every 4 years, we have to update our written covenant. And so yesterday I was in a hurry, and a minister brought me their covenant and said, I need you to sign this. And I flipped it to the third page and started to sign. And the minister said, you're not even going to read it. Like, you don't want to know what I promised and what you're promising?
Nice.
Right?
Right.
And so then even if we read it once, we stick it in a drawer or in a file. And then 4 years later, we're like, oh, we need another written covenant from you, right? And I think that these kinds of conversations are sometimes like that, right? Like somebody wrote that document somewhere, but this church didn't actually ever agree to it. And so I go to this church thinking that this church has adopted this covenant, but they actually haven't. Maybe haven't ever seen it, don't even know it exists. And so we have to regularly return to those conversations. And I think it's also and this is one of the things that we're learning in the conference setting with our trying to become an anti-racist church, right? Is that also it can't not be the person who needs the accommodation, who is constantly the person who has to name it and say, this is what I need. Like part of living into those relationships is being able to say when, because I know my husband well, and we enter into a place and I'm like, he's going to need some alone time, right? We've been in this room a long time. He's going to need some alone time. And I didn't ask him if I could share that, but he'll be okay with it. We have that kind of a relationship. But that is also part of being in a relationship, is for those of us who have the kind of abilities that are regularly accommodated in church, to be able to say, no, actually do use the microphone.
Yeah.
Not, no, I can hear you. But to actually say, no, do use the microphone. And sort of build that kind of a culture where we're in covenant with everybody. But covenants have to be tended. They can't just be a document that you put in a drawer.
I think of that even related to, sometimes we just forget to have the conversation. Like you were saying, Vicky, about how you failed sometimes to like bring the conference into the local church. I was the conference moderator for like years, and I would forget to talk to my local church about the conference. And how many of us are here and we'll go back to our local church, but will we make space and time for like, here's what we heard, here's the message, here's the insight, want to let you know what we received and gift it to you. we forget to have the conversations. And that's part of, I think, how we tend those relationships, like remembering, you have a good friend you haven't seen for a long time, like you need to tend that. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing, I guess, just from what Tyler and Sarah were just sharing. Covenant requires us to not center ourselves. Like we are always alongside. It's not just my need, but it's our need.
Yeah, kind of just from the local church perspective, one of the ways I encourage myself to share with the congregation is that we use the Central Pacific Conference prayer calendar. And during the joys and concerns in my pastoral prayer, I lift up whoever is on the prayer calendar. So it's just kind of, and that was lifted up by a member of our church.
Awesome. Yeah, one more time. Yeah, you're fine.
So I want to attend to the question around disabilities. And Rebecca Anderson, who is a member in discernment and talks a lot about thinking of God as a disabled God, and wondering what that conversation among the disabled community, which is not a monolithic community, but what are the teachings that we can learn from differently abled persons? And that's a group of people who are definitely othered in our congregational cultures, but also in society.
Yes. And those of us that, might in this moment be not consider ourselves differently abled, we lose out, like, because we're not having those conversations. Like, it is our loss because there's such wisdom in that relationship. There's so many good questions here, y'all. It's kind of hard. Some of them connect to each other. So I hope if you haven't heard your exact question, you still also hear like the overlap. But this one, how can the settings inspire each other to be about living the reign of Christ or building the kingdom rather than maintaining the institution? Maintaining the institution. How can the settings, I'm kind of blending a couple questions here, but how can the settings inspire each other to be about living the reign of Christ or building the kingdom rather than maintaining the institution? Did we have a God that mentioned this?
Yeah, I just said, I think Jesus had a few things to say about this. I mean, the minute we get the building set up, right? And I'm thinking metaphorically, but also literally, I mean, then it becomes around maintenance. It's unavoidable. And it's one of the ways we can speak to each other in the different settings of this church to kind of, in some ways, call each other out when we get into our, we think we know best. We think, it's all about preserving. It's all about, making sure that the traditions or, whatever it is that become our idols, that get in the way of the movement of the Spirit and the true church that is movement. I'm sure others have something to say about this. So.
I totally agree. And I also am probably in the minority because I think that if an institution runs well, it actually can equip people to serve the reign of Christ. So I have a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction when it's like, let's just throw out the institution because there is something to be said about some structure and some organization and some things that are built in so that when we live into this covenant, there's some sense of what we know, what we're offering each other in the covenant. So maybe I'm just old school, but when I hear all us talk about let's throw out the institution, That's not my story. My story is that there's still something that can be very powerful if the institution of the church doesn't become what we worship, but equips us to worship the living Christ in our communities.
Okay, I was gonna stop us on that powerful prophetic moment. And I wanna let these folks talk with each other one more time. And then we'll come back for a wrap up. So we have about 20 minutes, it's a little under 20 minutes left. And is that right? Yeah,
Yeah.
we live ending at 11. 18 minutes. Okay, well, I mean, I'm just rounding. But I'm just kidding. So friends, gathered community, turn to each other again. If you are, if moving is to another place is okay with you in this moment, you can move over and chat with somebody in a different area so you can get different people to talk with. But please connect with 3, maybe 4 other people in a way that works for you. And the question now that I wanted to keep my hands away from the mic to have us consider is, what does covenant mean? What does it mean about me as a local church member? In my local church, who am I in covenant with? Who am I trusting? Who am I in covenant? Who am I trusting? So just about make sure everyone gets to talk in your 3 or 4 meetup group, and let's just talk for like 8 minutes, and then we'll come back for a 8-minute wrap up. The Fishbowl folks, this has been really rich, lots of like really rich conversation, and then I told them, you don't get to talk anymore. So I would love to hear just a few reflections from y'all, because you've been listening and then percolating and then talking with each other. And so I want to pull out just a few things. How has this impacted you? What would you like to kind of share in terms of a kernel of this conversation?
Trying to understand a covenant for me. I've always thought it helpful to look at the counterpart, which is a contract. And then what's the difference between a covenant and a contract? Both have relationships, and both have terms to their relationships. In a contract, the terms are more important than the relationship. In a covenant, the relationship is more important than the terms.
Lovely. I love it when people preach from the pew.
Our group stayed together the whole time, I want you to know, because we really got into this. One of the things I shared or offered or suggested possibility is, how do we create covenantal culture in our congregations? Because there's a Spanish philosopher that says the definition of culture is a set of problems dealt with by a set of solutions.
Nice.
And so how do we create covenantal culture that holds us accountable, mutual, loving, understanding, all of those elements of culture, so that when someone joins us, visits us, it'll feel like that.
I love that, because I think when we were talking about that othering problem, like that's a culture of othering that we've allowed to happen, right? And so there is, since it's us, we can actually change that, but we'd have to change that through intentional practices. Love it. You brought us a bunch of questions.
Could you ask people to maybe stand and tell us who they are?
Yes.
And I think that would help maybe for them.
Tell us who you are.
If they're able.
Stand, but
It's okay.
you know what? Lou, thank you. I'm not the only one to do that. Lou Miller from Lincoln City Church.
Thank you, Lou. And do you want to just say your name, Linda?
I'm Linda Jaramillo from Ainsworth, UCC.
Thanks, Linda. Couple more thoughts.
Andy Wade from Bethel White Salmon. I was thinking about this term covenant and a lot
Put
of.
the mic closer to you.
Sorry,
Thanks.
and a lot of the terms that we use in church that have been misused over the years. So there's a lot there like trigger words. And I was trying to think, okay, how can I talk about covenant at Bethel in a different way? And I started thinking about the different words for love in the Bible. And maybe that would be a better way of addressing covenant. So what does chesed love? You know, what's the covenant love? It's that cement that holds us together. So I don't know. I'm just trying to reimagine how can we restate these ideas that are so important in ways that are more accessible to a congregation that maybe is very diverse and maybe has a lot of wounded people.
I love that. One thing that helped me understand covenant is the UCC liturgy for weddings has covenant in there. And I did a lot of weddings when I was at First Congregational for people who were not UCC, but I always used that liturgy, and I kind of started to embody the love, like feel the love of it a little bit more.
Ginger Redlinger,
sorry.
Smyrna United Church of Christ. And I, first of all, want to give a shout out to Alan Holt. If he's watching online, he's being celebrated tonight for his 60th year. And Alan, I'm thinking of you and Catherine and your grandson, Barack. Anyway, Adam brought up a great point, Adam Hang, about the UCC bulletins that can be used with services and how it keeps us in covenant with understanding different things that are happening in the country and stories of different people. And it helps connect to a piece of us so that we know that we're part in covenant with other people around the world, and how inspirational that is. And when I read those bulletins and I see those stories and I'm traveling somewhere, it's like, oh, I'm going to look for a UCC church. You know, I'm going to be there on Sunday. So I'm going to see if I can find one to go visit. So there's an expansion, but I think the essence is whether you're an individual or a congregation. We go back to the story of Jonathan and David. You co-create it. You have to be present and you have to co-create it. You can't impose it on someone.
I'm going to stop there with that prophetic word. Thank you, Ginger. I'm sorry if there's more folks, but hopefully one of the things that you've picked up from this style of facilitation is that you don't actually have to stop talking about this. You can keep talking about this, and let's keep talking about this. This is a very important conversation that is about our vibrancy together. It is about our desired future that we can co-create. Amen.